system for organising your fabric stash? If you don't have a system, then this episode will give you some super practical steps for getting what you already own under control. And if you do already have a system, but it's not really working that well, then why not try the system I'm proposing to see if it works for you? You can always swap things back again. I didn't have any kind of system until recently, when the idea for this method of stash organisation suddenly came to me. In this episode, I'll be sharing my method of organisation that I'm calling the seasonal stash. This system is allowing me to unlock the potential of what I already own, whilst stopping it from feeling overwhelming. It has genuinely left me feeling excited about sewing what I have. So stick around a few minutes to see if the seasonal stash system could help you. Plus there's details of a downloadable freebie that I've made for you. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 15 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis, and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes, whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hello, wonderful listener, how are you doing today? What are you up to as you listen to this? I honestly wish I knew. I'm feeling awesome today. The feedback from the first 2 episodes in this Fabric Stash mini-series has been wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone who left comments, shared the episodes on social media, DM'd me and emailed me. Lots of you have shared with me your own fabric goals for 2024, which has been so interesting. And heaps of you adored last week's conversation with the hilarious and insightful Lisa Bauer, who is the creator of the Last Sew Is Standing challenge. If you've been enjoying the episodes lately and have a spare minute or two, would you mind leaving a rating and review in your podcast app, please? I actually noticed recently that on Apple Podcasts, there have been no new reviews since July of last year. It'd be a quick and free way to help others discover the podcast, so I would be so grateful. Thanks in advance for that. So how's your making going at the moment? My current sewing project is a backpack project that I'm making using scraps and remnants of different coloured corduroy. I found a picture of a really cute backpack on Pinterest. My pal Julia did a reverse image search for me and discovered that it was by Zara. Anyways, the different panels and sections of the bag are made from a variety of different colours of corduroy, and I was so inspired to try something similar. Bizarrely, the colours of corduroy remnants that I have are almost exactly the same as the ones that they've used. Anyway, everything that I'm using for it is from my stash, because as you know from last week's episode, I'm still doing Last Sew Is Standing. I'm using the Sarah Kirsten Raspberry Rucksack pattern as my base, which is one that I've made before. And in fact, I've still got my first version, which is now very old and very dead. So I've harvested the zips and the hardware off of that one to use for this one. I'm also using all sorts of random pieces of interfacing and piecing it together where necessary. I don't have any webbing for the straps, so I'm hoping that I can use some of the actual corduroy to form the straps as well, but I haven't got that far yet. Sustainability wins and fails. So I don't know if this counts as a sustainability win as such, but it was definitely a win of sorts. So last week, just as the temperature really dipped, and whilst my daughter was ill with a virus, and my mum was due to come down to visit so we could celebrate second Christmas with her, our boiler died. It was super stressful, but mercifully the repair person was able to fix it and only one small piece needed replacing. It's definitely more of a thermal and financial win, but at least it wasn't a whole load of metal, plastic and tech heading to the dump and a newly manufactured one having to be ordered. On the flip side, my fail is that I had known for many months that it was not a healthy boiler and I should have got it serviced at least 18 months ago. But you know, they just always seem to be something far better to use our funds for. So I don't know if that really counts as a sustainability fail, but my thinking is that maintaining things before they actually break is a more sustainable way to live generally. So this week I get to thank these wonderful people: Kerry, Sharon, Deborah, Erin, Susan, Nina, another lovely Susan, and Kez. They all signed up to support the podcast with monthly financial contributions. And I get to thank existing patrons Zita and Maxine for upping the amount of their support. So the additional support that the podcast has received over the last couple of weeks is definitely helping me towards the goal that I've set in my head of what needs to be coming in so that I don't have to go and find some more paid work, which would affect my ability to put out podcast episodes. So thank you all so freaking much for stepping up and showing that this podcast means something to you. I'm not out of the woods yet, but this has been a phenomenal start to achieving my goal. So if you feel that you wouldn't miss the cost of a cup of coffee each month, or more or less, it's entirely up to you, please find the link to the Check Your Thread Patreon in the show notes or on the website checkyourthread.com. Well, that's what you can do for me, but let's get back to what I want to do for you. So this year, I really want to help people get to grips with their fabric stashes, help them to get their collection organised, find a system that works for them, be excited about what they've got and actually use what they've got. It's all about getting some of that movement and flow into our fabric collections that I was talking to Lisa about in last week's episode. I also want to encourage people to pass on or in some way redistribute the resources that they don't actually want. And I want to help people make the most of their scraps. These are all themes and topics that I'm going to be coming back to over and over again from different angles throughout this year. So this mini-series on fabric stashes was obviously my way of kicking off this overarching goal. And I'm so happy that it's been really well received by listeners. So yeah, today's episode. After the super lengthy episode last week, this week's is a more brief offering on the topic of fabric stashes. And it's looking at fabric stashes from a really practical angle. It's not concerned with our thoughts or complicated feelings, or even our goals beyond just using it. Instead, we're looking at a potentially beneficial organisation system. It's one that I've recently implemented and it is really helping me find quite a lot of excitement and inspiration in what I've actually already got. Obviously, there are many systems and methods of stash organisation, and this one might not be to your fancy. But included in this episode, there are some steps that I think are basically essential for any method of organisation. I'm not precious about my method, I promise. I just like to help you tackle what you have in some form for the reasons that I discuss in this episode. Lisa last week told us that the turning point for her in getting excited about what she owns was when she finally got her fabric organised and made it accessible. So if you don't trust me, then trust Lisa that it will be worth your time. So if you do like the sound of the method that I described in this episode, I want to make it as easy for you to implement as possible. So in the show notes for today's episode, which you can find on checkyourthread.com, I made a super clear breakdown of the steps. So that's there to guide you through. And in case this makes things even easier for you, I've made a downloadable PDF version that you can access completely for free using the link that is also in the show notes for this episode. You don't even need to sign up to the newsletter or anything. The link is right there in the show notes. Eventually, when I get a chance, I'll make this downloadable version of the guide accessible in the shop part of the website. It's still always going to be for free, but if you're listening to this episode in the future, rather than the week that it drops, it might be easier for people to locate it there. So one final note before we actually run the episode. So there's something that I didn't include in the episode explanation of how the system might work. So in this system, I am encouraging you to make 3 different piles of fabric. But I didn't mention that depending on the size of your fabric stash and the shape or size or orientation of your storage system, one or more of those piles might actually have to be multiple piles. That has been acknowledged in the guide in the show notes and in the free download, so don't at me. Right, until next week, I need you to take care of yourself and your loved ones and the wider global community. Download the free seasonal stash guide and enjoy. I've been on my own stash busting and stash organisation journey for a while now. I want to free up some physical space and some mental space, and I want to help the lovely pieces that I own fulfil their potential to be beautiful, useful items to wear. It will take time to reduce my stash to a volume that feels more comfortable, and I intend to enjoy the process of planning and making as I go. I know that this goal will take years rather than weeks or months. During a recent fabric sort out, I had a bit of a revelation. This revelation has changed how I think about my fabric and its storage, even my project planning and how to unlock the potential from what I already own. It's helping with that longer term goal of reducing the volume of my stash, while stopping it from all feeling overwhelming in the meantime. This idea is what I've started thinking of as a seasonal stash. What is a seasonal stash, I hear you ask? Okay, so most of us live in climates where there is some seasonal variation throughout the year. You might not have a clear definition between spring and summer and autumn and winter, but most locations have some hotter months and some colder months, and we have wardrobes that reflect that. What I realised is this: fabric stashes, or resource collections, or whatever else you want to call them, usually have some seasonality, just as our wardrobes do. Our wardrobes contain clothing suitable for different seasons, and most garment fabric stashes contain pieces that can make clothing for different seasons. Now, of course, it's not that cut and dried. I understand that it's not a 50-50 split, or any kind of clear split, between cold weather clothes and hot weather clothes. I'm guessing that most people's wardrobes contain many garments that they can reach for most of the year. Those garments can be worn in various combinations and possibly layered up to suit the weather conditions and temperature on a given day. However, some wardrobes do also contain some items that are specific to the more extreme ends of the climactic spectrum. Some people actually put those very season-specific garments away out of sight for a number of months and then be reunited with them when the weather shifts back. I personally love doing this. I started doing this because there's not enough space for everything that I own to live in the easily accessible part of my clothing storage all year round. But I've found that the practice of putting away off-season clothing has become an enjoyable little ritual when it's time to swap the items over. It can also feel like suddenly having a load of new clothes, even though you might actually have owned them for years. Familiarity can breed contempt, after all, and disrupting that can breed delight. Anyways, most of us garment sewers do have our preferences when it comes to the projects we like to undertake. Some love to make jackets and coats, others activewear, others linen dresses, and so on. Me, it's often dungarees. But by looking through any number of sewers' Instagram grids, it's clear that the vast majority enjoy challenging ourselves to make a variety of different garment types. We tend to make different garments that cover us for various situations, including various seasons. And the revelation that I had is that my stash could be organised the same way. So what does this actually look like? Obviously, if you choose to adopt this idea, you will need to arrange things in a way that works best for you and your physical space. So first, allow me to describe the system broken into steps. Then I'll explain how it works for me in my personal situation, and then we can explore a bit about how the system could be set up for different physical spaces. Right, so the steps to organising your stash seasonally. So the first 3 steps I'd recommend for whatever system of stash organisation you want to implement. Okay, step 1, collate your fabric into one spot. So we need to gather it in one place to sort and organise it all. But ideally, we also want to be storing it in the same spot going forward. So there are very few things related to sewing, or actually probably anything else, that I feel that everyone should follow. But I feel really strongly that your lengths of fabric, if at all possible, should live together in the same room, if not the same cupboard or set of shelves or storage tubs. There, I said it. Having fabric in piles and bags in various locations around your home makes it too easy to lose items or forget what you've already got. And it makes it harder to compare the fabrics you've already bought when planning a new project, and keeps you less accountable to the materials you already own. I get that having your fabric scattered around might make your collection feel sparser or less intrusive. You might even feel like you're doing any other people that you live with a favour by not having it together all in one large lump. But for the reasons above, it's not actually doing anyone any favours keeping it here and there. It might even be more annoying for other people to have to pull out another bag of fabric from a cupboard when they're looking for a toolkit or the wrapping paper. Anyways, collating your fabric in one space, or at least in one room, is the first step to any stash organisation, including this seasonal system. Step 2, edit. Right, so go through it piece by piece and be honest about how you genuinely feel about each item. This doesn't have to take an age. You don't need to set aside a whole weekend, unless your stash is gigantic, I guess. But you can do this really quickly. If there are items in there that you can honestly say you don't ever want to sew with, then they need to be removed and redistributed somehow. What to do with fabric you can't see yourself using is a topic for another day, but in relation to stash organisation, know that right now you need to set any of those pieces very much aside to be dealt with later. There's no point in going to the trouble of sorting and organising stuff that you don't actually want. It's a waste of effort and energy and space. Right, so now you should be looking at only the pieces that you genuinely like, plus probably some pieces that you aren't particularly excited about, but you can see yourself using, like lining fabric or something. Step 3, separate anything small or scrappy. How you define small or scrappy is totally up to you, but for me, it's anything that is too small to make a garment from. I would like to encourage you to keep those small and scrappy pieces. They are a super useful resource in and of themselves, but I do think that finding uses for them will be much easier if they're not wedged in between the longer and weightier lengths. The only exception to this might be if you have scraps of one of the lengths of fabric in your stash. You might be able to cut some of the smaller pattern pieces from your scraps when you come to use that length, so you might want to store those together. And if you have any garments that you're keeping to either refashion or harvest fabric from, I'd also recommend taking those out too, so you're just left with your main stash of garment-sized fabric lengths. It's unlikely that you're ever going to be comparing and choosing between a length of virgin fabric or an existing garment for the same project. Refashioning, upcycling, and even projects made from harvested fabric tend to require a very different process, so let's move those aside too. At this point, you may wish to go in a different direction with your stash organisation, such as separating it by fabric type or by colour or by weight or whatever. If you're heading off in another direction now, you go and have fun, but I'd still recommend you go through those 3 steps first. Once again, those are number 1, collating, number 2, removing what you won't use, and number 3, setting aside anything small and scrappy and existing garments. Okay, let's move on with seasonal stash organisation. So step number 4, separate your fabric into 3 piles. Right, so in pile number 1, this contains the fabric lengths that you can see yourself using over the next couple of months. The pieces that are suitable for the season you're currently in or are about to transition into. Only include the pieces that you have set or loose plans for. For example, denim destined to become jeans, or some cotton lawn that you've earmarked for a short sleeve blouse. Okay, so pile number 2. In this pile, put the fabric pieces that you can see yourself using over the next 6 months to a year. Basically, fabric suitable for a season or 2 ahead of what you're currently experiencing. Again, there should be set or loose plans for each piece in this pile. Right, and then pile number 3, everything else. You've already done the work and gone through all your fabric, so at this point your stash only contains items that you genuinely want or can see will be useful. Therefore, the pieces in this pile deserve to be here, but you just don't know what to do with them yet. So, however your storage situation looks or is orientated, make sure pile number 1 is put where it is most visible and most accessible. Pile number 2 wants to be behind or underneath pile number 1. Still pretty accessible if possible, but not in constant eye line. And pile number 3 can go away, out of sight, but preferably not completely inaccessible should inspiration strike. Right, so then what happens when the seasons change? When a season comes to an end, it is time to rotate the fabric around. Have a good think about why each remaining piece from the front pile didn't get used. Maybe you didn't feel strongly about the plan and need to rethink it for next year. Or maybe you felt that there wasn't a strong need for the item in the wardrobe it was destined for, and perhaps it'll be more useful next year. For example, if I find that one of my kids already has a lot of pyjamas, and the fabric that I earmarked for that didn't get used this time, it didn't mean the plan was bad or needs to be changed, just that the proposed item might be more useful when they've done some more growing. Or maybe you just simply ran out of time. Then the former pile number 2 gets moved to the front. So the remaining items left over from the first pile, then they get redistributed into the new next 6 months pile, the new pile number 2, or they head on back to the no plans pile, which is pile number 3. There's every chance I've made that sound more complicated than it needs to be, but hopefully you get the idea. So why does this work? Because no matter how much fabric is in your stash, you're only ever looking at the most relevant section of it. You're not seeing it in its entirety, so it can't overwhelm or confuse you. You can stick to your plans if they are good, solid plans and actually get some of those made into your wardrobe in a timely fashion and get use and enjoyment from those garments straight away. But what about pile number 3? And what is the ultimate goal here? If you've catalogued your stash in some way, as recommended in the previous episodes of the Fabric Stash mini-series, your fabric pieces will never be truly forgotten. However, there's definitely a risk that pile number 3 remains pushed to the back for years, with those items never seeing the light or the sewing table. So when the season changes take place, take the opportunity to look through that pile as well and see if any ideas spring up. Then those pieces can be redistributed to one of the other 2 piles. But if you found yourself putting those pieces back on pile number 3 for a few years in a row, maybe it's time to let them go. So now you've gone through the organisation steps and understand the process of rotating them, how might that work for your physical space? So personally, my fabric stash sits on one deep shelf in the airing cupboard in our bathroom. On the left of the shelf, there are carrier bags full of scraps and leftovers, sorted by type. By the way, this is not the only location in my home containing fabric scraps. I don't feel as strongly about those all being in one location. And on the right-hand side of the shelf sits my stash of garment-sized fabric lengths. As per the explanation above, pile number 1 is at the front, pile number 2 sits directly behind it, and pile number 3 is situated at the very back. When I open the cupboard door, only pile number 1 is visible, so my stash appears to be about 1/3 of its actual size. Then I can focus on the pieces that make the most sense to work with currently. And often I'm most excited to work with these because I can envision myself wearing these items straight away, or very soon after completion. Of course, it's unlikely that you have the exact same physical stash set up as me, half of one deep, narrow shelf. Perhaps you keep your fabric in drawers, or tubs, or baskets, or a set of shelves, or previously in a combination of these. As I said before, is it at all possible for you to house your fabric all in the same spot? Even if that means storing your patterns or your threads or something in a different location. Out of sight is out of mind, and if our goal is to use what we own, to have one of those collections of fabric with some movement and momentum with stuff coming in and going out, like I was talking about last week, or to have the beautiful palette of fabric to work with that Lisa from last week's episode enjoys, then we need it all together. However yours is set up, whatever storage is available to you, is there one part of it that is more visible or accessible than the rest? Or could you move things around so that is the case? Think about how you could apply a similar sorting strategy to your space so you can focus on one part and effectively ignore the rest for a few months. If you have storage tubs that stack or live under a bed, can you put pile number 1 on the top one or in the one at the front? If you have shelves, can you put pile number 1 in your direct sight line and possibly contain or even cover up the other 2 piles? Same with baskets. Could each pile have their own basket? Then pile number 1 could live closest to your sewing space and in your sight line. Even if your stash is very small, just a drawerful perhaps, I'd still recommend following these steps and putting the most relevant pieces at the front where they can really grab your attention. So there's my idea that I'm throwing into the ring of sewing organisation strategies. I would really love to know what you think of it, if you plan to give it a go and what you like about it, or why you feel that it wouldn't work for you. And if you have a system in place that's really helping you actually access and use what you already own, please share. I would love to hear any practical tips and tricks for managing and organising your physical stash. So please email me, Zoe@checkyourthread, or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing Zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!